Hey, this is Passy from Passy's World of ICT, the guy with the white hat. And as you can see, it's an incredibly sunny day here in Melbourne, Australia. And straight after this video is finished, I'm getting out on my bike and going for a ride along the beach road. So let's get into it. So we're adding a second part onto the previous lesson, this login system we're building with XML files. And this part's going to register new users, and there's going to be an application form that prospective users fill out. And we're also going to revisit the password validations we did way back in the Dandenong Dog Club lesson. So we'll be redoing some of the validations as well, because validations are always a very important thing. So the new user application form. All right, so what's going to happen is where we had our Tennis Dream Team front end menu, last time we were doing the login and we got all that working. This time we're going to be working on the new button, so to create a new user account. And there'll be this form to fill out with lots of different fields here, and they'll have to say why they want to join up as well, and then they can submit or exit. So that's going to be it, and that's going to write this to an application file, a file of new applicants, and then in the next lesson after this, we'll have that admin button over here, so the system administrator can click that and they'll be able to read all the new applications and decide whether they're adding them onto the system as a new user or not. But anyway, let's get on with this lesson. So we're going to cover the following. We're going to create that new user application form screen, which we just saw. We're going to have the application spanning across multiple form screens, just like we did in the previous lesson. There'll be full validation of all input fields on that form. So that's going to be a lot of programming work and a lot of testing, as we've seen in previous lessons, but validations is an essential part of any application you're building. There'll be a new XML file added to the system. This one's going to be for those new user applicants that have filled out the form and submitted. And we're going to also be reading the previous file that has the registered users, which are already on the system, as well as the new applicants as well. We're going to need to read and search those files. We're going to write out the new applicant data onto the applicant's XML file using some append code, which we haven't seen before. So that's going to be some very useful learning. And this will be taking us a step closer to finishing off building our full user authentication front end, which we'll be doing in the next lesson when we add the admin functions in. So it's very critically important that you have done the previous lesson where we set up the user details file and set up the login screen and the front end menu screen and all those things, because you need to have done that and completed it, because you need all of that code and all of that working before you can add on this new screen for applicants, which we're doing in this lesson. All right, so this form that we're building here, as we saw in the previous lesson, we're just taking the application that we've been building, and you go to Project and then to Windows, Add Windows Form underneath the options there, and you can add another form onto the system. So this one's going to be called User Application Form. And then you can style it with all the colors and add the labels and text boxes in. So this background color is that system hot track color. Everything else is in white or smoky white. Font sizes are 12 for most of these guys. Now the text boxes, these white areas here, all need special names on them, which are listed right there. And this one, for reasons for joining, set its multi-line property to true so that we can make it bigger, and drag it down so it's about 3 lines long. We're going to have them enter some reasons why they want to have access to the application. And then the submit button down the bottom there needs to be called BTN Submit. Okay, so that's the form design. That's what needs to get set up. Make sure you name all of the text boxes those names, because that's the names which the program is going to refer to them with. So we need a new XML file to store these pending user applications that are going to get written into this file when they click the submit button. So what we've got here is we've got dataset applicants, DTAB, a data table for each applicant here, that's the record, and in there we've got the values from that form, like the name, phone number, email, all those things they typed in we're storing. And so you can set this initial record up here to start off the file using Windows Notepad, or you can just download this with the downloads that come for this lesson. So if you go into the video description and look for the link for the downloads for this lesson, you can get this file already pre-made. Now notice there is one extra field at the start here in the record, applicant registered, and we're setting that to false. They haven't been registered as a user of the system yet. This field's going to be used when we get to the admin function in the next lesson, but that's not actually on the form. The program's going to set that to false for all of these new people that are going into the applicant's file. All right, and just remember, we have to edit it in Notepad. Is probably the easiest editor to use, but Notepad's not really great for being able to see things easily, so you can check it in Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge. It's the best way to browse it, but you cannot edit it, and see how we can just see things a lot clearer here when we view it in that mode. So remember that from the previous lessons we've done on XML. All right, now we're also going to be using the previous lessons, that user details XML file we set up. That's the file of all the users that are already registered and already valid users on the system, where we store their name and just their user ID and their password in that file. So we're going to be needing that file from the previous lesson. And there were 3 people in that, Barry and Sharon, and we also had the system administrator login details as well, so you could do an admin login. So yeah, you need that file as well from the previous lesson. You can get it in the downloads if you haven't got it. Now there's quite a bit of program code to add for this form. So we need to link this new form back to that main front end form so that when they click on the new button, it'll go to this form. We need to read that external Applicants.xml file. Now we're going to write it into an XML doc in program memory to reference it, and the same thing with the user details, read it, put it in an XML doc in internal memory. All of those input fields on the form need to be validated, so that's going to be a lot of code and a lot of work, but we'll be able to pretty much copy and paste all the code from back in the Dog Club lesson and other lessons where we've done ASCII validation and regex validations, and that'll be easily to do. It's going to look really long and hard, but it's just going to be a lot of copy and paste from previous lessons. And then after we've got that validation going, something else we have to check is that the user ID must be unique. So we can't have 2 people with the same user ID, because that's not going to work for logging on. So we need to check that nobody else has reserved a user ID that someone's putting in, or that that user ID is already in the user details for a registered user. So we're going to have to search both of those files for whatever user ID the new applicant's putting on, just to make sure that someone else hasn't either decided, yeah, I'm applying and I want to use that user ID, or there isn't already someone on the system who's already registered and they've got that user ID. So once we've got all of our data validated, we've made sure we've got a unique user ID, then we'll be able to have the submit button do the final thing, which will be adding a new record onto the end of the applicant's XML file. So we're not going to do all 6 steps all at once. We'll build this up in stages and test it as we go. Remember, incremental development and testing is the way to go with these projects. Otherwise, they're just too overwhelming and too big and too hard to find where there's a problem when things go wrong. All right, so task 1 is just we need to have that new user applicant form we've made and link it into existing front-end form 1. So we've got form 1 in our application from the last lesson. We just need to double click on the new button for when they want to create a new user, and for that button's event code, you just have user application form, that's the name of that new form we made, .show brackets, and that will bring that form up. So you test it, and what happens is we click new, and bang, that new form we've made for the new user application comes up. So that's all working okay. So that's the very first thing. Just get something set up, write a little bit of code, and test it and make sure that's working. So we can tick that off as done. Now we need to read in the applicant's file to our program. So we're going to be doing this on the user application form. So if you click anywhere on the user application form to get into the coding, we need import system XML. You can see we're on the user application form because it's telling us public class user application form. And we just need to set up that we're going to be using an XML doc in memory to store this applicant's XML data into. And then when they click button submit, the first code we need on the user application form, that new one, is that we're going to read in the the Applicants.xml file, the external file, into that actual document that we've set up in memory to store it. So the code for that's just like the last lesson. Check that the file actually exists, make sure it's there. If it's there, okay, just load it up from the external file into the doc that we've made in memory. And if it's not found, send them out an error message that something's wrong. So you need to double click the submit button to get into this event, add that code there, and just write a separate subroutine that's going to read in the applicant's file. All right, now when we tested this, what happened was we just had it open up our form, okay, and click submit, and it said applicant's XML file not found. Uh-oh, what went wrong there? Well, we hadn't copied it into the bin debug. So we'd made it up with that first record of Jasmine in it that we saw before, but we had not copied it into the bin debug. So it's got to be copied into the bin debug folders we've shown you in previous lessons. That's where your program executable ends up. And from the previous lesson, user details XML should be in the bin debug folder, but that new one we're making, Applicants.xml, with the one record in it, yeah, make sure that's copied in the bin debug folder. Then you won't get this error, and yep, it'll load up and you just click submit and nothing happens. So that's good. We assume it read the file and there's no problems. So we also need to read in the user details file. So that's pretty much the same thing. Just in that same user application form code, we're just dimensioning here another XML document, XML users doc, where we're going to read in that user details external file of the already registered users like Barry and Sharon and the administrator, and get that into memory, okay? So again, we write just a separate subroutine straight after the one where we're reading in the applicants, read in the user details, make the subroutine like this, check the file exists, and if it does, bang, just load up that XML users doc in the memory of that program, okay? So just need to make sure your files are always in the bin debug folder, because we're not using any paths here, we're just using direct file names to keep it nice and simple. All right, now when you test that, what should happen is that it just loads up and just click the submit button. We don't get any errors, so the files are getting found because we're not getting any error messages to say they're not found. So that's all good. We've finished reading in both files. Now comes the big part, the validation of the user inputs. So remember, like all of our lessons, take breaks between things. And look, something else we'll mention too, we'll just stop right now before we start validation of user inputs. Just remember that there are the downloads. So look, if you don't want to watch a whole video, because that takes up a lot of time, and I know a lot of the teachers watching this prefer written materials, well, you can look, just get the downloads for this lesson, and you can give the students a PDF, and they can just read through that a lot quicker than watching the video and just look at things and set them up and do this. See, oh yeah, I've got to do all that. That's my checklist, do it, test it. Now the code here, you can't kind of copy and paste it. So if you're a teacher that likes having the students have to type the code in, well then just give them this document where it shows them the code, but they'll have to type it all in and test it and make sure it's okay, right? So that's got the full set of instructions for making the whole thing right up to the end. So you could get that. And with the downloads anyway, you get the Word document, which has even briefer instructions, but it does have all the code that can be copied and pasted. Now, you might not want to give this to your students, or maybe you want to take a copy of this Word doc that's part of the downloads anyway, and just edit it up and just give them some of the code fragments and have them do the others. You can kind of mix and match and do whatever you like with this. It's very flexible. So look, if you don't really think videos are good because they take too long, well, that's fine. Just get these downloads and then the code's there. So you could do it yourself first before the students very easily. You'll just have to make the actual forms and stuff, but you can just copy and paste in the code, get it all working, make sure you understand it before the students do it. All right, so let's get back to where we were. The big process of validating the user inputs. So this is going to be a big task, but we've got all that code from our previous project, so we should be okay. It's not like we have to do a whole bunch of Stack Overflow Googling and learn new stuff here. It's all stuff we've done before in the course, and that's why it's very important that you've done our complete course and you do the lessons in order. That will be the best way to approach it. All right, so no field on the form obviously is allowed to be left blank. We've got to check, the full name's not blank and it's only got letters, hyphen, spaces. Our phone number, we want to to have 4 digits dash 3 digits dash 3 digits for a mobile phone preferably, and it needs to start with 0, so we can use our old regex validations to do that. Email address, we've already got a regex that does that from other programs, so you can copy and paste the code pretty much and just change it a little bit. Check the user ID is not blank. Now, we won't do any other checks, because if they want to call themselves, you know, Harry $, that's fine by us. We don't really mind. Now, the password, though, we do have some strict rules on. It's got to be at least 8 characters long and contain letters and at least 1 number digit, but no special characters like $ and exclamation mark, all right? So that's going to have a lot of string processing to read through the string, checking there's at least 1 number there, counting the numbers, all of that. We did all of that in the Dog Club password. That's all a long, lengthy process, but we've got pretty much code we can copy and paste. And then easy peasy, just check the confirm password's exactly the same as the password that they put in, and check their reason for joining. They've got to have that text box at the bottom where they write why they want to join up. They cannot leave that blank, but we don't really need to check, or we can't really check what they put in there as long as it's not left blank. So they're all the validations we do, and as usual, like, we do them one at a time. Start with the name, put the code in to check the name, run the form, check that the name stuff's working okay. If it is, we move on to the phone number, get all that working. So we do this all step by step by step. We don't sort of do it all at once. And we're going to use the same approach as in the Dog Club, okay, for this. So we're going to have all these different Boolean variables here that are going to indicate that different fields are okay or they're not okay. So all of those fields on the input form, we're just setting them as false at the moment, assuming that none of them are okay. And we're going to have a master variable here that when we check all of these, if they're all okay, we can set the master variable Boolean all input data is valid equals true. But at the start there, we'll check it false. So that's in the top of your program. You add that code in, and anywhere in the background area of the form, we're also going to add some code into the form load. So for this user application form load, we're just going to set maximum lengths on these text boxes, all right? So they can't type a password bigger than 20 characters long or a confirm password bigger than 20 characters long. There's no real reason to do that. It's going to make it hard to read in the text box if it overflows out of the text box. Emails do have to be quite long because they could be a long address. And there are reasons we want them to write a couple of sentences there, so that has to be like 250 long. So we're just setting the max length property on each of those fields, but rather than do it on the screen where the form is, we're just doing it inside the program and getting that sorted. Now, test out that that max length limiting values work. So if we run the program and just type some letters, we should see that they can only go a certain distance in most of those boxes before they run out of letters. So that's good. We know that the limiting values are working okay in that form load process. So remember, we just code things and test them as we go. So on that button submit, we've got reading in our applicants, reading in our user details for the XML docs. Now this is where the next bit comes in. We set all the fields, assuming everything's wrong on the form, because even if something was wrong and they've changed it, maybe they went back and changed the email address as well for some reason, decided, oh yeah, I'll also use this different email address. So we go back and check every field every time. So we set them to false every time that submit button's clicked. And we have a main module here called do validations, a main subroutine. So next we write that subroutine. So this main subroutine, which we write separately, do validations, we're going to just have that we start off with the name, we work our way down the form in order, do the name. And we don't move on to do any other fields until the previous one's okay. So it's kind of this cascading step-by-step thing, because if you don't do it that way, what'll happen is if they've got 4 fields wrong, it'll just bombard them with 4 error messages, one after each other, and it's too much for them to think, oh, what are those 4 things I have to fix? So we just find one thing wrong, give them a message, and by using this if Boolean name valid equals true, so the name has to be valid before we'll go on to the phone number. And before we get down to the third field, email, it will only do that if the name is okay and the one before it, the phone number, is okay, all right? Now you could do this with exit subs as well, but we've just chosen a different way here, which is a more proper, correct programming method using these cascading kind of ifs, until we get right down the bottom here where we've got the confirm password and the joining reasons. So we're only going to check the joining reasons if, you know, name, phone, everything else on the form before that bottom field of joining reasons is correct. Then we'll set the joining reasons to false and just check out how they are. And we'll do all this checking in separate subroutines. That's why they're kind of underlined with red squiggles at the moment. Then finally, if we find out at the end of that every single field we've checked, they're all okay, so they've all been set to true when it did each individual validation subroutine for each field, we can set the master variable there that all of the input valid data is valid. Then back up in the main part of the program, if it sees that that's true, it knows it can now go forward and write out the record to the XML file. But actually it won't do that. It's going to actually go and check it isn't a duplicate user ID that they've chosen, and then it'll write it out. But we'll get to that later on in the lesson. Now we're going through this validation stuff really quickly because we've done this all before, and we don't kind of want this to be a horrendously long video. So for all of those separate validations we just specified up in do validations, which is the main driver module, we're going to have submodules to do each one. So we'll just set up the empty submodules. So we need one called validate applicant name, validate phone number. And as we set these up, this will get rid of all of those red squiggles we've got at the moment. So we're just setting up for every field on the form, we're having a separate little validation subroutine. And now we work on each of the subroutines. So validate applicant name, we fill in what needs to go there. So checking that it's not blank. If it is, tell them they need to enter one, and we test that. So if we just leave that whole form like that and click the submit button, the first one it checks is the name, and it says your name needs to be entered in the full name box here. So we don't bombard them telling them all these other boxes are empty as well. We just hit them up with one message so it's simple for them and they can fix this one, then they can worry about the other ones that they need to do. Now we still need to do a little bit more validation on the name, so we go back into its subroutine there, and we need to check that it's only got A to Z letters, upper or lower case, but it can have hyphens for names like Watson, Smythe, or for long names Van der Meer, it can have spaces in it. So we also allow 45 and 32 in our ASCII values because that's for space and hyphen. So just like we've done previously in other programs, we have to set up this long if and or and make sure we got all the brackets right, so it's a little bit tricky. And then if the name is valid, we're also going to move the cursor down to the next field on the form, phone, so it's ready to do the phone. But if it's not valid, we're going to keep the cursor focused there, keep the cursor on the form in the name, and give them a message. All right, so that will complete the name, and we just test that out. Like if someone does have a long name, like Prudent Watson Smythe with a hyphen, it happily accepts that. But if we have Watson Smythe 99, all right, on there, that's numbers, and numbers aren't allowed as part of the name, so we get the error message. If she decides to do a sort of email addressy type thing with an @ sign in it, well, special characters aren't allowed either, because that ASCII validation was only allowing normal letters, hyphens, and spaces, so an @ sign isn't allowed, so we get the error. And if you put Billy Bling Boy, yeah, he wants to tell everyone he's got lots of dollars there, or he thinks he does. Yeah, you're not allowed to have those special dollar signs either. It's only letters, hyphens, and spaces, so that will give an error. So that name testing is all good. We've done the name module. And then we need to do the phone. The phone is just setting up regex. We just want 4 digits, a hyphen, 3 digits, a hyphen, and 3 digits. Regex stuff we've done before in programs, and that should be straightforward. When we test it, if the name's blank, we get an error message. If they haven't put in those dashes or hyphens that we wanted, because remember we wanted 4 numbers, dash 3 numbers, dash 3 numbers, we get the error. If they've only done one of the dashes, and no, they've done both dashes there, but we didn't start with 0. It starts with 9400, so we give them a specific message about that it needs to start with 0. And if it's like this, that's all good. Starts with 0, got the dashes in the right place. It's 10 numbers in there and 2 hyphens, which makes it 12 letters long. So that's all good. That Joey Stanton's got his correct and he doesn't get any error message. And also notice it's gone down and put the cursor in email, already telling us there that the next thing we need to type in is the email address. Now on the email, again, we're using the same regex that we've used before. So if they leave it completely blank, that's a problem. If they don't put in the .com here on gmail.com, that's a problem. If they forget to put the @ sign and just do a dash sign instead, that's a problem, and that's going to be an error message. If they put in jillyjill@gmail.com, well, that's all of the correct type of format you need for an email address. So no error message, and notice the cursor has gone down now to tell them that they're now ready to do the user ID. All right, now on the user ID, all we want to do is make sure it's not left blank. So that coding's pretty simple. And if they leave it blank like that, it tells them they have to put something in. And then if they put something in, it's happy and moves down to chosen password. All right, now the password is very complicated. We've done that in the Dog Club project, and look, it would take slides and slides and slides to show you all the code here and go through it. But we've already done that in the validation password entry form previous lesson about the Dandenong Dog Club. So either go back to that lesson, or even better, just get the downloads for this lesson. Then you can see all the code and revise it and just remember, oh yeah, we got to do all these string searches and count numbers and count letters and do all that stuff, because we need to check that it's not blank, that the length's 8 characters or bigger, that it's only got letters and numbers in it. Make sure that it at least contains 1 letter, and make sure it contains at least 1 number. So there's a lot of different subroutines there and checking to do. You'll have to get the downloads to look at that. Now when we test it, if they leave it blank, obviously that's a problem. If they don't have any numbers in there, okay, and it's not long enough, like max row, that's a problem. If they've put max row man in, well, that's long enough, but it hasn't got any numbers. So it tells them here they've got to have at least 1 number in it. And then if they put in an @ sign, that's no good, because you're only supposed to have letters and numbers in that password. And then finally, if they put in Max Roman 21, well, that's going to be great. It's longer than 8. It's got a mixture of letters and numbers, so that's all good, and that'll pass validation. And it's moved down to the next field with the cursor there to do the confirm password. Now, confirm password's really easy. All you got to do is check that the confirm one is exactly the same as the one which is there for the password. So just check those 2 text boxes are identical, and that's all good. So if they put in pirate 225566 here, and here they've used a capital P for pirate, so it is case sensitive, little p there and capital P here. That'll come up as a mismatch, so confirm password does not match original. Fix your confirm one up. As long as they're all the same, both using little p there and the same letters and numbers, that's good, and that'll tick off. And we're just down to reasons for joining, and reasons for joining is a simple one. We just want to check that it's not left blank, that they've typed something in there. So if they leave it blank, it's going to say something needs to be entered in the joining reasons, and once they put something in, that'll be good. And in the next lesson, the system administrator will be reading that and deciding whether they can join up or not. Now, we also need to do one more additional thing, which isn't something we've had to do before in validation. And this is a special one. No 2 people can have the exact same user ID in the system, because the login process won't work. So like if both people had the user ID passy and they type it in, you know, you could have 2 different passwords there, and how would you know which one's which and whether they've entered in their actual password for them if you've got 2 of them? So user ID, if you just think about it, it's got to be unique. We can't have 2 identical user IDs, so we have to have protection and validation to make sure that doesn't happen. So every time someone fills out the form and they've put in a user ID, we need to check the user details XML of registered people who are already on the system. Make sure they're not using one of those user IDs that's already on the system. And also check the applicants, the people that are waiting to join the system, because someone might have already picked their user ID to be something that's exactly the same as this other person on the form wants as well. So we've got to check both of those files. So in the applicants file at the moment, that start file you get from the downloads, we've only got one user called Jazzy, user ID Jazzy, and our 3 registered users from the previous lesson are Bazza, Shazza, and the admin user, okay? So there's 4 particular user IDs there which are already taken, so we can't have someone typing in on the form now and picking one of those 4 user IDs because they need to stay unique. So they've already been taken. We need to tell the person, sorry, you need to pick another different user ID. All right, so we need to totally rewrite that user ID validation subroutine will be the easiest thing. So go to where that subroutine is in the program at the moment and just delete all of the code between the where it starts and the end sub. Just get rid of all the stuff where we're checking whether it's blank or not. And that's the easiest way. But look, this first bit I think is still the same. So just add this back in basically. We need to check it's not blank and just exit the sub if there is a problem. But as long as it's not blank, we can continue here. And this is where we put the brand new code that we need. And what it's going to do is we dim Boolean user ID unique. We just assume first up it's true unless this checking proves it wrong. And what we need to do with our XML doc, you know how we read in the applicant's file and we got it sitting in that XML doc in memory. We don't want everything in the XML doc. All we want to do is just get a copy of all the fields so we can go to the user ID field and check it out. For each record in the applicant's doc. So we have to make this thing called a node list. So we dimension an applicant's list. So this is going to be a list of all of the fields for our current applicants in the applicant's file. That's an XML node list. So we go to our document, we select out nodes based that they are members of the DTAB applicant record, okay? And that'll get all the fields for each DTAB applicant record, which we've got in that XML doc. And then we can search through that. So we go for each applicant element that's in that list that we just made of all their fields. We're interested in the applicant Apple user ID. And if the inner text of that, what's inside the tags for that value, is equal to the one that's on the form here, well then we've got a problem. So we set Boolean user ID unique equals false, and so the Boolean user ID valid isn't going to be any good, and we need to show them a message box. Sorry, the user ID is already being used by another user. Choose a different user ID, and up the top of that box it's going to say user ID not available. And put the focus or the cursor back into the user ID field on the form. Okay, so that's just going to check out that there isn't someone in the applicant's file that's already chosen that user ID. And then we need to do the same thing basically with the user details file. So for the user's doc, for the user details that we made in memory, we're just pulling out a node list of it of all the fields for all of the people that are already registered on the system in userdetails.com. And checking out the user IDs there to make sure that the one that's on the form isn't someone who's already a registered person. If they are, that's a problem, and we need them to pick a different one. So then after we've done those 2 checks, check the applicant's file, check the user details file, down the bottom of that subroutine for user ID, we can say if Boolean user ID unique is true and the Boolean ID not blank is true, so they haven't left it blank and it's a unique one, then we can set Boolean user ID valid is true, and you know that's going to be okay, and we can move it down to now for them to enter the password. So yeah, we just needed to replace the user ID validation, have this stuff to check to make sure it's a unique ID that they've picked. So if we've got Jasmine Cocorichetti here is applying for the Tennis Dream Team. Now she's decided she likes the user ID of Jazzy, but when she picks that, it's going to tell her, sorry, user ID is already being used by another user, choose a different user ID. So she won't be allowed to choose that user ID, because if you remember, back in our applicants file, Jasmine Lennox, who's applied previously, already has reserved that user ID of Jazzy. So we can't have this other Jasmine being Jazzy as well. She'll have to pick a new one. Maybe she'll be Jazzy88 or something different, okay? So because that user ID's changed, it's already been used by Jasmine Lennox, poor old Jasmine Cocorichetti has to pick another one. Now what happens if her dad was Barry and his nickname was Bazza, so she decides, yeah, I'll just use my dad's name, Bazza. as my user ID. So she tries that out and it says, no, user ID is already being used by another user. Choose a different one. And so that's because when it went over and also checked the registered user details.xml file, already found someone in there called Bazza. So she couldn't use her dad's name Bazza as her user ID either. So third time lucky, let's hope for Jasmine. So she decides she's going to be Jazzy18, and that's all a-okay because in our applicants and in our registered users, there's no user ID called Jazzy18. So that's going to be unique. So she can have that one and that'll all be good. All right. So once everything is good on a form, then we can now write the output. So what we have is that just past where we had the button submit click. So we're in that button submit click event code. And we had all that stuff to do all the validations. And if that finished, and when it finished, Boolean all input data is valid equals true, well, then we know everything's good on the form. So we're ready to write out a new applicant. So we need to use try, catch, end try whenever we're doing file writes. So we're going to have a separate subroutine that's going to write out the new applicant. And also, so that they're not just keep clicking the submit button or anything, we need to give them a message, application lodged successfully. And we also need to enable this button submit enabled false, because if they keep clicking it, it's going to tell them they're a duplicate user ID and all this stuff like that. So once it's been lodged and written their record out, we just put the enabled button to false so they can't keep clicking the button. If something goes wrong with that whole process, we want to catch the exception and say something failed, contact support, there's some sort of submit error on that. And we also need some code because we've set that button submit enabled to false. If someone comes back into it again, we'll just set up in the form load process that btn submit.enabled equals true, just to make sure the submit button's always enabled when the program starts. So we'll just sort of put that safety code where we already had some stuff for the form load subroutine. Okay, so here's where we do this new subroutine, write out new applicant. Now this is a new XML thing for appending an additional record to the end of an existing XML file. But we actually append it to the end of the document in memory and then just write the whole document out. But this takes a few steps and we'll go through them. So we have to basically create the tags first. So where we've got dtab applicant for a record, we need to just create another element that's dtab applicant. All right, so that's going to be the record, and then we do all the fields that go inside it. So the first one's this Apple registered, which remember we always wanted to be false. So this sets up the tags for it and gives it the name Apple registered. And the inner text in between those tags, it's just going to put false. Then we have the name here, so we set up the name tags each end, and inside those name tags we put the name off the form goes into that, and the phone off the form goes into the phone one, the email off the form goes into the email one, and so on until we've got all of our records off our form and we've put them into some XML elements. And then what we need to do is to our data table applicant, which is in the XML doc, we append a new record. So it's called append child, and you have to append all of these fields on. And then the full record we've just made, we need to take our XML document and append this child record, this new record we've just made into that. And then once we've done that, then we can just save the modified document. So we just take that whole XML app stock we've built up that's got that new record on the end of it, and we just write that out to the file with a save Applicants.xml file. Okay, so that's something new, but that's really cool. That's how you add a new record to an existing XML file that you've got there. and we need the try catch, but that was kind of up in the main module that was calling this sub module. So when we test that, what happens is, as long as everything's okay, when they press the submit button, there'll be no errors, and it writes it out to that file and says application lodged successfully. So that's all good. And what we should do is see if we browse that Applicants.xml file in the bin debug folder, just double clicking it to bring up Edge to browse it. There she is, Tiana Barlow, and all the details have been added into the file okay. And it's got its tags and her details and everything is good. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. Once we've had someone do an application and then that submit button's disabled, they're finished. So we need to get them to exit out of this form. So just Control-C, Control-V, the submit button across to here, and just in the text property, call it exit and rename it BTN exit up the top. Double click on that button, and this is the code you need. So we're going to have the are you sure message sort of thing on there. And if they are sure, this current form me.close, we'll close this form off and make sure the original front end form, form1.show, is showing up. Okay. Otherwise, we won't do anything if they've clicked no. So when we test that out, what happens is that they click the exit button, are you sure you want to exit? And if they click yes, what will happen is this form just closes down and disappears. It just hides and closes down that part of that little program. And we're back to our front end main menu. So that's all good. And the next thing, final thing, is on this front end main menu, we just need to add in an exit button so that they can exit from that as well. So we'll just add another button here, exit and close information. That's called BTN exit system is the name of that button. Double click on that button. This is the code we need to add for that, that when they want to exit the system again, just have an are you sure message. And if they say yes, we need to close the login form if that's open, close the user application form if they happen to have that open, the Dream Team main menu if they successfully logged in, like in the last lesson. If that's open, we need to close that. And finally, we need to close this current form. So you can't type in form1.close because we're on form 1 and it's not allowed to refer to itself. So remember, we discussed this in the last lesson. For this form here to close down, the last one we need to make sure is closed down, it's me.close is the way you code that. All right, and so when we test that one out, what happens is if all these other forms are open as well, we click that exit, are you sure you want to finish and exit, and say yes, all of this, the whole application, all the forms have got open, everything will close down and disappear. So you need to do the same thing in your program, obviously, and make sure that's all working. So that completes this lesson. Yay, it's been a long one. And these longer lessons are getting more complicated now. You really need to probably get the downloads material as well, rather than just rely on the video. The next lesson is going to be the admin function. That'll be the big granddaddy lesson, the biggest one of all, where we're going to read that applicants file and see who the new applicants are that we have. And if they all look okay and everything, we're actually going to add them into the user details.xml file so that they're now a registered user, and send them an email using their email address from the application. Then they'll be able to go to login and log in as an existing user. All right, now this lesson doesn't have to be for a password administration system. What we've shown you for a new user application could be used for some project where you're adding a new customer onto your system. So you need to get all the customer details and you need to validate them to make sure they're all okay. And, you know, maybe they have a pending application that you have to approve, so you would have a separate file that you write them into, or maybe they just go straight into the customer's file because you're the person doing the data entry anyway. So you know, oh yeah, I know that person, we've already done a credit check on them separately and we know they're good to go and we just need to enter them into the system. But anyway, that's going to be in the next lesson. That'll be the biggest, most complicated part. But this all has you can use this in a lot of different systems like job tracking systems, a kind of fast food restaurant ordering system, all this stuff about XML files, having forms, validating the data, appending a new record to the end of the file, reading a whole file into an XML doc to process it in your program. That can be used in lots of things. It doesn't have to be a password administration system. So we do have the whole programming course where you can find those previous lessons about XML files. If you're jumping into this as a newbie doing XML, you need to do those previous lessons. So we'll just have a really quick look at that. Have I jumped past it? I think here we are. So yeah, if you go to the programming page, that's it here. I think I just clicked the reload. So yeah, you can see all the lessons. So there's lots of lessons there already. And the stage we're at with the course now is we're down into the XML type stuff. So if you haven't done any XML before, you probably need to start at this one, reading and displaying XML files, writing XML files. This was the one about logging in using the XML file. And this is the current one we're on, VB login system, add new user. Okay, so that's the one we're working on right now and doing the video for, and we need to get this video wrapped up so we can get out on our bike on this beautiful sunny day and go riding along the beach road, although it's probably going to be a bit crowded this time of morning. So where are we? We're just here, so let's get into that. All right, so thanks for watching this video. We hope you're finding it useful. If you are finding these videos useful, make sure you click the like button and also subscribe to our channel because we've got all those videos there and you can get notified when we put a new video out as well. And it's going to help us if we get more subscribers. You know, maybe we'll get up to 1,000 subscribers and be able to put a Cadbury chocolate ad on the front of the video and get, you know, 10 cents a day from YouTube or something like that. But no, look, it's all good. Subscribe. We suggest you subscribe, follow the channel. We're putting out a lot of stuff. We're trying to put out every week. The admin video for passwords, we're trying to get it next week, but it's a big one. We don't know. It might not make it. It might be the week after, but there'll definitely be another video coming in the next 2 weeks. So thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next video.